Welcome to the Unpacking the Framework video series. This series provides valuable information about the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. My name is Denise Luscombe, and this video introduction is being recorded on Whadjuk Noongar Boodja. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the land you're listening from, and recognise their continued connection to country, waterways, and community. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This video is one of a series that describes the evidence and practice information that underpins the principles of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. You will hear from both national and international speakers throughout this video series. This video covers ecologically-based, a universal principle of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention, and is presented by our international speaker, Professor Robin McWilliam. Robin is a Professor of Early Intervention and Early Childhood Special Education at the University of Alabama, where he founded the evidence-based International Early Intervention Office, or EIEIO. He's the Executive Director of an early intervention program under the auspices of the EIEIO. He is the President of the RAM Group, international experts in the routines-based model, which he and his colleagues have developed. Robin has been awarded almost $8 million in grants, has published over 90 scholarly articles, and has published 10 books. He is currently writing with Cami Stevenson the second edition of his best-selling book, Routines-Based Early Intervention. His books have been translated into Portuguese, Mandarin, and Korean. He's created many free online resources related to the routines-based model, which can be found at eieio.ua.edu. Robin has travelled extensively, helping with implementation of the routines-based model in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Paraguay, Poland, Portugal, Singapore, Spain, Taiwan, and the United States. Before he began at the University of Alabama, he worked in early intervention programs, then on the faculties of the University of North Carolina, where he rose to full professor, and Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. He also worked at a non-profit organisation for young children and their families in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Thank you for the introduction. I'll share my screen now and begin talking about ecologically-based early childhood intervention. It's a pleasure for me to talk about ecologically-based early childhood intervention. As you'll see, I've been thinking about this for a long time and realized that there are a number of important aspects of early childhood intervention that are related to the ecology of the work that we do. First, let's start with the very common concept of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, where he postulated that there are these different systems surrounding an individual who we would think of as the child. So we have the child, and the child is surrounded by people in his or her microsystem, which varies from definition to definition, but it almost always includes the family, of course. Depending on the age of the child, it might also be the school. If it's an adult, it might be work, friends, and neighbors. The mesosystem sits between the microsystem and the exosystem, and the exosystem is consists of the factors that have an impact on the family, school, friends, and neighbors, and they often consist of the parents' friends, extended family, mass media, social media now, and local governments. And then the macro system has the economic system, culture, political systems, and social norms. And the chrono system has to do with the passage of time. So the idea of this systems approach to thinking about child development is that each of these systems influences the other both ways. And it makes the importance that we can't just focus on educating the child or providing therapy to the child, or improving parenting or anything like that, that we have to really consider all the factors that influence eventually the development of the child. Now, another area or influence that we need to think about is the International Classification of Functioning. For International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health, which was developed by the World Health Organization as a way of reconceptualizing disability from a medical model to one that is more based on the participation of the individual in activities. Now, in our case, the participation could be considered child engagement in everyday routines. This connection here is really at the heart of what influences a child's behavior and development. But of course, there are other factors that impinge on this. What is the disorder, the disability that the child has? Is it a motor one? Is it a mental one? And are there other issues to do with the diagnosis or disorder of the child? Some of these involve body functions and structures, and these include physical and mental things, the body and the brain. They affect the activities that the child can participate in. Of great interest to us when we're considering ecologically based influences on development are the environmental factors and personal factors. So the environmental factors we generally consider to be the physical environmental factors, but also consider that parenting is an environmental factor. And the personal factors are the characteristics of the child, him or herself, that have an impact on how the child participates in activities. For example, some children are naturally very social. Other children are naturally quite happy to be alone in their own company, so to speak. Some children are very verbal, other children are not. So those personal factors also influence the extent that a child might be participating in activities. So the International Classification of Functioning, also known as the ICF, is a very helpful way to be thinking about the idea of ecologically based early childhood intervention. Let's talk about the famous 7 circles. These 7 circles represent what, do you think? What comes in groups of 7? Yep, days of the week. So here are the 7 days of the week represented by these circles. And what do you suppose this sliver here is? Yeah, that is the weekly early childhood intervention session. And look how much of the week it represents. And look at all the white space. In the implementation of the routines-based model an internationally implemented model. In the Far East, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, they're very interested in this concept of the white space. How are we going to get to children's getting help or intervention during the white space, the time that the child is not in early intervention? And the secret to that is to focus the early intervention session on building the capacity of the caregiver. So sometimes the caregiver involved is the family, and sometimes the caregiver involved is the teacher. Both of these types of caregivers have the opportunity to help the child learn to participate in activities throughout the day and throughout the week. Even if you take out the sleeping time that the child has for naps and nighttime, there is still a lot of time that the child is learning. And so what we're trying to do in early childhood intervention from an ecologically based perspective is to build the caregiver's capacity to help the child function successfully in everyday routines. Now, one of the connections between ecologically based interventions and the routines-based model is the importance of developing eco maps with families as part of the needs assessment process, which we call the routines-based interview. And so we begin with developing an eco map with the family where the child and the people he lives with or she lives with are in this middle box. Across the top are informal supports. On the sides are intermediate supports. And on the bottom are formal supports. The informal supports are kith and kin, the extended family, and friends of the parents usually. The intermediate supports are work, recreation, and if the family participates in religious activities, they also are part of the intermediate supports. And the formal supports are the services that anybody in the family receives. The thicknesses of lines has to do with the amount of contact or support that the family gets from each of these sources of support. Fat lines, like the BFF, the best friend forever, means a lot of support. Moderate lines are what they sound like, so they get some support. Thin lines mean the family knows that the child or that they or the child has this support, but they don't know a lot about that person or get a lot of support. It's not negative, but it's just they're present. Stressful support is depicted by dashed lines. And as happens in many of our lives, somebody can get some kind of support, but it comes at a cost. And so that's why there would be, in this case, there are two cases in this example, moderate support with a dashed line. This was the mother's work doing some university teaching where she needed the money, but she had an unpleasant team leader. So that's why moderate support and dashed line for stressful relationship. One of the important concepts of an ecologically based early childhood intervention is thinking about the whole family, not just the child, or even not just the child and parent. But and so one of the ways we arrive at or assess this type of support is to ask during the routines-based interview, also known as the RBI, one of the questions is, when you lie awake at night, what do you worry about? Now, people might question why we would ask a question like that in trying to find out the needs of the child. Well, because it's not just the needs of the child, it's the needs of the family also, because the extent to which the child can be helped is predicated on the extent to which the family needs help. So this is what we call the two-bucket principle. A parent can only fill his or her child's bucket to the extent that his or her bucket is filled. So we want to convey to families that their own needs are important, that we're here to help with those, and that ultimately will result in the child's getting more help. The most common answer to this question, by the way, is finances. When you think about the fact that we have parents of young children so at their stage of family development, they might be having to really scramble for financial resources. There's also research that shows that having a child with a disability does, in fact, have an impact on family finances despite government help. The second most common answer has to do with the future, that they worry about what will happen to the child when they are gone. Now, the first one we might be able to do something about by redirecting the family towards resources that might be available to them to help with financial needs. The second one we really can't do anything about except to offer our empathy and understanding, to say, yes, we understand how that must be a concern. But no intervention, no goal is going to be developed for the intervention plan around the family thinking, I worry about what's going to happen when I'm dead. So we need to start thinking about not being solvers of problems all the time, but by being good listeners. By being a good listener, it shows the family that we care about them. And it also allows us to be more helpful by really listening to what it is that families are saying to us and not always trying to jump to finding a solution. Families' daily routines. Life happens in routines, and all families have routines, by the way. There are some families who are very routinized. Their days are very similar in structure. And there are other families who are very chaotic and unstructured. But in all families, at some time, the child, youth gets fed. Nappies or diapers get changed for babies. Toileting happens. They go outside, they go into the community, maybe not every day. They have time at home that's hanging out time. So all families have these different times of the day. They just might be organized or unorganized. But all families have routines as we define them. And it isn't just the family's routines, they're also the child's. So sometimes children have routines that are outside the home, especially in schools or other group care arrangements, such as childcare or, as I said, school. And so it's important to assess the child's needs in those routines also, because development happens in the context in which the child lives. That's what ecologically based means. So we need to understand for each type of routine that the child has at home, in the community, or at school, what is the child's participation or engagement like, so that we can tailor our interventions with the adults who are in charge of those times of the day to really meet the child's needs. So services and natural routines mean they are not direct hands-on. They are not in routines always, but about routines. So we might not be there at bath time, but we can be talking to the family about how bath time goes and building strategies with the family, not for the family, for them to try out at bath time. We also need to think about adverse childhood experiences. Children, some of our children have had those, and we need to be sensitive to those. But sometimes the parents have had adverse childhood experiences also. These are sometimes known as ACEs. So trying to get to know the story of the family, of the parents, and of the child, that allows us to use trauma-informed early childhood intervention, for example. So I'll end now with some acknowledgements. First, I want to acknowledge you for your unpacking the ECI practice framework, which is a very good framework, and I'm happy to be a small part of that. And on my part, I thank Cami Stevenson, who is my helpmeet and collaborator on all things routines-based model. I also want to thank my own early intervention team called EI at UA, that's Early Intervention at the University of Alabama, for implementing and probing the routines-based model. And then finally, thanks to the RAM group, a group of experts around the world for implementing the routines-based model internationally. Thank you very much.
We hope you've enjoyed this video, part of the video series Unpacking the Framework for the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. The review of best practice in early childhood intervention was commissioned by the Department of Social Services. Led by the University of Melbourne, the project team included PRECI, professionals and researchers in early childhood intervention, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, SNAKE, National Voice for Our Children, Children and Young People with Disability Australia, and ACD, Advocating for Children with Disability. Coordination and production of the video series was led by PRECI.